right now. Okay. Um, so when we're thinking about developing voice and emotion through spoken word, I am assuming that everyone here, you're here because you either write poetry, spoken word, are a storyteller, or a writer. In some way, shape, or form, you engage in lyrical expression. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Awesome. So because we're drawing from a personal memory, uh, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how a lot of times, I'm sure as you know, writing and poetry, it just um, helps to make sense of certain moments that we go through. And these moments can either represent or bring light to or explore some truth that can that others can also connect with, something recognizable for them as well. And so, what I love about spoken word poetry is that it's a point of contact with the listener that can contain limitless potential to share revelation that can spark hope or healing or inspire action towards some good, towards some compassion, towards some kindness, or sometimes towards destruction, whether in a positive or negative way. When I think about, sometimes a revelation can also be very disruptive, but in a good way, in a way that is actually in the long run freeing. If in the moment it can be painful because it allows and almost pushes us to confront something in us or something in humanity that may be difficult to face. Um, so I think that as a writer and as a poet, uh, I think we do a lot of the work of vulnerability, actually, right? Where we're willing to explore and discover and emotionally and psychologically and spiritually um, go to places where, it's almost like we have no choice. There's like a burden to do that. and so and so I wanted to create this space so that we can kind of just have a space to do that again, like, and also kind of uh, have maybe refine some of our actual writing skills, language skills, linguistic skills, performance skills to help us, draw out really the story, the voice, the emotion, the revelation that we each have, that we each carry, that wants to be expressed. And so what I do also appreciate about poetry, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is that and writing in general, is that it can come, and it does hopefully come from an authentic place, right? An authentic place of struggle, of whether it was failure, growth, or learning, grief or celebration or uncertainty. And I think that when we think about, okay, what do I want to write about? Maybe we already know what we want to write about, or even in the future, whenever I sit down to write something, it always honestly comes from life that I've lived, whether it's personal struggles that I've been through, understandings and growth that I've gone through, or what I've seen and observed and experienced in the world, or even my response to what is happening around me that has affected me deeply or has affected my loved ones deeply. And um, when we're thinking about, okay, how do we develop voice and emotion in spoken word? I would say number one um, is in the choice of a topic, like we're going to write about something we care about, right? I know it's like very obvious, but sometimes we can lose sight of that fact, right? And we'll try writing something and we're completely bored. And I'm like, why am I trying to write this? I'm not interested in this at all. And so that's a good sign to maybe change and shift either how I'm looking at what I'm writing about, or even to completely shift my focus, my topic, my that moment that I'm trying to look at. Um, so I know that there's many different um, people who can say different things, and we hear again and again, write from what you know, write from your experience, even if it's not something you've personally gone through, but something that is authentic to you. And so I think drawing on personal life or the lives around you is powerful. because as a poet, our task is to sift through what others might consider mundane or what they might overlook, or even sometimes what they may consider to be too large and overwhelming for them to look at. And then I think the act of writing, the act of poetry, what we do is we bring order and understanding, even if it's not full understanding, right? But some understanding, some uh, to that either seemingly mundane thing that actually holds a lot of treasure, or the thing that's too overwhelming. And so I think the poet's task is to draw from that, to try and bring some kind of insight, beauty, or even, honesty to that thing that brings healing, and can bring healing. So that's really where I kind of tend to approach writing from, is always thinking like this, like the gift of words, of storytelling, of poetry, that I've been given, that I've been very much inspired by, when I hear other poets or read poetry or read stories, and realizing that there is so much potential in words to build up or to destroy, right? And so being willing to take this gift that I've been given and really serve others with it, actually bring hope and inspiration to the listener, to the audience. And in that act too, in that act of sharing, I find my own process and journey of growth and healing as well. And so I love writing spoken word that really draws from that place of vulnerability, um, and also in a lot of different, you know, global traditions, historical traditions, lyrical forms, whether they were sung or not, were often came from a cry from the heart, right? And so that in itself is I think very helpful, um, as well as can be a challenge because of the courage it takes to be vulnerable, right? The courage it takes to be honest, the courage it takes to be willing to expose what's in your heart to the either like uh, to very often either the criticism, skepticism, or acceptance or non-acceptance of the world, right? um, so that's definitely something, but it's also a way that we that cry from the heart contains emotion in itself, right? It will contain your voice in itself. It will also is in that cry of the heart. There is a lot of social and cultural and historical meaning, like for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. It's a way that we not only make and share meaning, but in some ways it's a way that we share and make identity too. It's a type of identity formation, corporate identity formation. And so um, all this to say, I think that I just wanted to reconfirm and re-encourage us all that, it's not like, we understand and we know that the act of creating art or poetry or music or multimedia forms um, is a brave act, as well as something that holds in itself so much value, right? And so I think that sometimes as creatives or as artists, I personally sometimes struggle with, is this even valuable, right? Is this even making any kind of impact? Is this even useful? Because especially in a society where sometimes things that are quote unquote more practical, or have more material kind of impact are considered more valuable. Whereas things like, you know, music or art or etc. I mean, it's definitely changed a lot in like the past 20 years that I've been alive, but I'm more than 20 years old, but in just the past 20 years, I've noticed like a shift and a change where we are appreciating and we see more the value of creativity, right? But I think still sometimes as artists, especially if we've got a voice and we're trying to express that voice, there can be a lot of pushback to just, whether our own insecurities or just external pushback to silence that voice, right? In many different ways. So I definitely wanted to just start off with just encouragement that um, you know, each of us here, and for each poet, like there is so much value in the cry that's in your heart. Like there is value in the story that you want to tell, in the poems that you want to write, in the pieces that you want to sing. Like there's value to that. And and my hope is that in this workshop we begin to be able to pull out that value even more, and on a practical side gain some tools to bring that forth even to a clearer and to a degree where we feel even more confident in that as well. So just to start off there, and first, this is something that somebody I know had once told me, and they do like life counseling, and their whole thing is to, how do we get to a place of greater wholeness, basically. And one of the foundational things that they teach is to be honest about your life and about successes, mistakes, everything. Be honest, but and take responsibility for your actions, but with compassion. Right? And I was like, oh, that's so good, right? Like being very honest about our lives, our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors, our past, our present, taking responsibility for the things that we need to take for, but with compassion, and to not over or underestimate the value of what I have to say. So, meaning, I think people can veer maybe towards one direction or another, but my tendency is to veer towards my story is not important, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that that we can go into, but we don't need to go into. But that's something I've always struggled with. My story is not that important, right? So that's underestimating, whereas overestimating would be like, my story is the only thing that is important to everybody, and I am the center of the universe, and everyone has no story that is equal of importance to my story, right? That's like overestimating. And so being honest, right, being like truly humble is neither underestimating nor overestimating the value and the importance of your story, right? And being honest, of taking responsibility, but with compassion. And so that's where I would just kind of like set that as the background, as just so you know, kind of like where I'm coming from. And then definitely you can, add to that, disagree, elaborate, I am very open to hearing. So the other thing before we actually get into some of the more detailed things of literary devices, and it's just actually, I think that's it. Yeah, so we can go into some more of the details things. But before we do that, if there's anything that you would like to share or comment on or add some more thoughts or elaboration, I would love to open up some time for that before we go into some more practical things. Yeah. Or any questions so far? If not, we can just go straight ahead. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Jill, I tried to make things a little bit bigger because sometimes when I share screen, people are like, I can't see, the font's too small.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully.
Very considerate of you.
Yeah, so let me know if it's too small. We'll just read it out loud and figure out a way. Yeah. So we'll just jump right in. Just some review. I don't know if you guys were able to see the first spoken word workshop that we did. We did that in, I think it was November of last year, I think, or September. But that goes through, like, it's just 2 sessions. It goes through, again, all the basics of writing and of performance. And so that is available on our website too, if you wanted to take a look at that at some other time. But just wanted to highlight 4 categories of literary devices. I was an English literature major, and so I could talk about literary devices all day long. But for today and for for kind of our focus for today, I just kind of did a broad 4 categories, and then we can go as detailed into each of the categories as we want. But the first category, comparison. And so comparison in like a good way. I'm talking in a literary way, not in a like I'm comparing myself with another person and I feel really terrible. Not that kind of comparison, but as a literary device, like when we are using language that can compare, like similes or metaphors or analogies, or sometimes even personification, because if we're talking about emotions, those are very abstract things. And so allowing for comparisons that are unique to your perspective, right, can really help the listener and the reader connect on a visceral, emotional, and level. Like, for example, love, tons of love poetry always compares the subject of one's affection to things that are really beautiful or larger than life, to express how the person is viewing the one that they adore, right? Sometimes with abstract emotions, like let's say there's, you have rage, right? Comparing rage to some kind of animal. It helps to draw forth the textures, the emotions. Like, how does rage feel to you? Like when you are fighting that emotion, or how does it feel like to you? What is that experience like for you? For one person, it might be a shark, that's like silently looking around for its prey. For another person, rage feels like to them a T-Rex, that's like, kid has tiny hands, but they're like so angry and they want to devour something, and yet they feel a sense of impotence in their rage too. And so I think with comparisons, that's just one example. We can really have so much fun with comparative language, with similes, with metaphors and analogies. And what I love to do is actually blend a lot of these more technical devices of like metaphor, analogy, personification together, to really draw out like the way that I have experienced something. And so that's something to, everyone, like there's so much poetry that's written about, let's say, you know, uh, a trauma, childhood trauma, or a loss, or unrequited love, and yet we want to know what that was like for you, right? um, Specifically, like when you went through that, how were you processing it? What did that look like or feel like to you? Because each there's this lady, she's a neuroscientist, her name is Dr. Caroline Leaf. And I really appreciate all of her research that she's done, because she talks about how that each person is incredibly unique in the way that they think, feel, and act. That even things like personality tests, et cetera, are not actually 100% helpful and accurate, because each person thinks, feels, and acts so incredibly uniquely. There is actually no like um, standard of this is the normal for every single person, but rather each person, it has their own normal in terms of what is wholeness, what is healthy. So everyone, for example, says everyone will experience state like anxiety, right? So anxiety is not necessarily abnormal, but there are healthy ways to respond and manage anxiety. And so it's just very interesting. So when I think about that, I think about this is so true, because um, when I talk with someone, and we might be talking about the same exact event that we have both experienced, and yet their way of understanding that event can be so different from mine, and is so different from mine, actually. And so to kind of really appreciate that understanding of how this person, even though we may have grown up together, we're in the same family, we come from the same background, and we've gone through the same event, I cannot make an assumption that I know exactly what they're feeling and thinking. Right? Because each person is so unique. It's such a unique individual. And so when to really have confidence in that when we're writing as well, right? And so I think um, using different kinds of comparative language is one vehicle through which we can really, discover what is the unique way that I experience this emotion, or that in this instance, right? Like if I were to do just, a writing practice on the way that I experience different emotions and, as different animals, right? Like I'm sure all of us will come up with something very different, right? So that's one category. Second category, and these all kind of go hand in hand, actually, at the end of the day. Second category that I put is sensory language. And so this is language that appeals to our five senses. And here I want to encourage us to go for concrete and concrete details, especially when we're dealing with abstract things like emotions, that sometimes are actually very hard to put into language, actually, right? But giving concrete, detailed language, that's part of sensory language, because our five senses um, usually have to do with the material world, right? We smell things, we taste things, we hear things, we touch. So it's very, there's a physicality to sensory language that is often helpful, right? Helpful to understand the immaterial world, helpful for us to understand the invisible dynamics that happen in life. And so and it can set a very tangible emotional landscape for our narrative, right? And within that, there's all sorts of imagery as well. In my writing, I use a lot of sensory language, actually, a lot of imagery, because I'm a very visual person as well. So a lot of the um, times I just experience things very visually. So that's another area. Um, and even with, right, okay. So third category is rhythm. And so this can refer to obviously rhyme or rhyme scheme or repetition of certain sounds, the way that we put those sounds in a specific order, even the combination of different syllables that we use. So rhythm and musicality create moods in our pieces. And because we are a people who naturally have music, like creation naturally holds musicality to it, right? There's rhythm in everything, actually. And so when we pay attention to the rhythm, to the musicality of what we're writing, and pay attention to the rhythms that our words are creating, it creates moods as well as psychosomatic responses in the listener, in the reader. And that's actually the beauty of poetry, because as an art form, it came out from oral traditions, which have rhythm in them, whether they could be very lulling, and give a sense of peace and well-being, or your rhythm that you are saying can be very celebratory, um, and so paying attention to the rhythm of our words, and when we're delivering it as well, what is that rhythm? Can create different moods, whether one's of well-being or hype, celebration, or disruption, or syncopation. So anyone here a musician at all, or sing or play an instrument or study music? That's okay if you, or just really like music. Yes, okay, yes, then right? Like music creates different moods, right? Like when I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like go out and we're gonna celebrate, you're not gonna put on like Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, right? But that would not be fitting for a celebratory time, right? Whereas sometimes when you're like, man, like, I just miss this person, you might, turn on some, Killing Me Softly, right? Like, and so definitely paying attention to the musicality of our pieces is very helpful, especially in spoken word. And with these two, like, I think sometimes and then you can fine tune what is your natural, I guess, the natural musicality of the way you speak. And it's good to find that. It's good to discover, what is your voice in that sense as well. But also at times to challenge yourself to maybe break out of maybe the go-to rhythmic pattern you may even unconsciously always go default to, if that makes sense. So at a certain point in my journey, I realized like all my spoken words kind of just have the same rhythm. And or in one piece, I'm like, it's just the same rhythm throughout the whole piece. And so for the listener, it can get very tiring, actually. And they can start to like, zone out, especially if it's a longer piece. And so learning to how to bring dynamic rhythm to my spoken word piece as well. Yeah. The fourth category is just a catch-all category, diction, which is so broad. It just means your word choice. And our word choice creates a distinct voice and tone that is unique to your writing. So some very literal devices are like whether we're using slang, colloquial language, formal language, regional language, a language that is not English, or even just personal language, like maybe you and your family, like each family, or even in your friend group, right? You guys probably have words that you've made up and that you use, right? Nicknames and things like that. And so incorporating and paying attention to the diction that you're using definitely creates distinct voice and tone in your writing, right? So, so paying attention to those things as well. So those are four general categories that as we're writing our pieces, we can be aware of and incorporate some of these devices as we're writing and revising our pieces. So I just wanted to look at some poetry examples now. This first one is from a 7th century Bedouin poetess, actually. The Bedouins are a nomadic people group in like they're in, Israel, Palestine, I think in the deserts of Saudi as well. And so she's a 7th century poetess. So this is a translation of what she wrote, but I appreciated the analogy that she represents. So this is an elegy. This is an elegy to the loss, commemorate the loss of someone she loved. And so I loved the imagery that's in this, as well as the analogy. Like she compares her beloved to, and what she's feeling to very, concrete things in her world. So she says, this is my heart. A she-falcon with broken eggs whose yolk has vanished, nothing left but the shell. Oh, my companion, hunter of the fleet gazelle with long eyelashes, this passion of his brought on each night. By God, were not the desert path so rugged and impassable, I'd jump like a heedless one, startled by a slithering snake, dreading its sharp-toothed sting. So maybe we can take a minute to look at this and just whatever kind of jumps out to you, whatever like really you, any responses to it. You give it a minute or so.
Well, I guess I would say I like the composition on the page, how it's arranged in three, and we're kind of getting like, it feels to me like short little bursts of emotions. Like
Mm,
the first section, we're feeling like a deep loss. And then the second, like the thrill of her companion, like,
mm,
or whoever that may be, how that makes them
mm.
feel. And then the final one, also with the exclamation too, is this feeling of like, um, heedless, like excitement, like a quick
Mm.
feeling. So just, I like how short they are and how it injects the emotion very quickly in such short amount of time.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the economy of her words, right? How even in poetry, like we have to make each word count. And I think it's the same with spoken word. Like each word has to count, right? And so, um, yeah, every word counts. And so I agree. She does that so well, or this translation also does that so well. Um, this imagery here too, and the comparison of her heart with, um, or herself, a she falcon with broken eggs whose yolk has vanished, nothing left but the shell. And it's like, if I just even think and sit with that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's like crushing, right? Like, think about, your eggs are your babies, right? It's like the net, but they're broken and the yolk has vanished. We think about a yolk, it's like, oh, it's just a yolk. We're like, no, that's the life that was in there, right? And that's actually a horrific image. It's horrifying. It's very heartbreaking actually, right? And it's like, oh, nothing left but the shell. And I was just thinking, like, nothing left but the shell, that can potentially be something that can be almost a cliche, right? Like, I'm just a shell of a, but the way it's couched in this, image and comparison of a broken egg, a she falcon's broken eggs, whose yolk has vanished, right? Is I mean, that right there, it really is such a, there's something very, like, almost inarticulate, like an inarticulate rage and grief, in that image, that she has cat, and yet something so powerful. It's a she falcon, right? Falcons are like birds of prey. They're powerful, powerful, powerful birds, and yet this powerful bird, seeing, her broken eggs with the yolk vanished, right? Oh, it's like very, 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 um, very profound. Yeah. Um,
For me, to Janet,
mhm,
that section that you
mhm,
just talked about
mhm.
spoke to me the most. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, wow, it's so expressive. It's so simple, and there's only a couple words, but like it's like nothing left but the shell. I was like, oh, like I feel her pain, sort
Yeah.
of, like
Yeah.
just with those couple words and the analogy,
Yeah.
um and so, like, I don't know, I was just like, okay, I I can see. And then she goes on with the the detailing and then the different word choice that she had, and I thought it was just really expressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And because the Bedouins were a desert nomadic tribe, or they are, like all of her imagery, it's really in, desert animals. Like you feel her background, you feel and can hear, her social, cultural, historical history and her identity, in the simple even, setting and word, like, um, the 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 falcon, a gazelle, right? Desert path, rugged, impassable, snake. These things that may not actually be part of our everyday world, they are part of her everyday world. So at first, it can feel very foreign, like, oh, I'm not a desert, person. I'm not a nomadic. I'm not a desert nomad. And yet still there's something when I read this poem I can connect to, like Jenny, that first part, you connected with. And so as a poet, she's bringing voice to a very identifiable loss and pain, right? In a way that's very unique to her. It's to her experience, and we are moved by it. We find some such value in what she says, and even saying like, oh, I can understand that. And I think when we encounter a poem or a story where we're like, wow, I can identify with that, it makes us feel less alone as well, right? And just the knowing, wow, great. So I have a few more. This one is poet Sandra Lim. And would someone want to read this actually?
I can read it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
At the other end of the wire by Sandra Lim. When he called, there were 261 emotions at play. I thought there were only wistfulness, humiliation, and mere bitterness left, but lo, I see now the brilliance in the numbers. Emotions 75 and 78 made me happy just to know they existed. I felt less alone, more impervious. I was emboldened by the existence of 152. Though how was I supposed to accept 9, 14, and 179? You deserved better, distress and indigenous aside. Something about 260 broke the spell inside me and offered up a tiny shift. I opened my eyes in the fog and tore off the surfaces of 261 and 4 with a great shout.
Thank you. Any thoughts about this one?
I really love that Sandra talked about the 261 emotions and then juxtaposed that with 4. Like, just sit there and realize 1, 2, and 3 might have been just warm-ups. I'm like, oh, I get this. I've been this person.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I love that too. It's so like, there were 261 emotions at play. It's like, yep. And I love the way she breaks that down too, right? And it's just like, I see now the brilliance in the numbers, and just the way she interjects that, but low, right? Like, it's just, that to me is like, whoa, that was very, that rhythm, that sense, that tone of like humorousness, but also like moment of freedom and revelation, honesty, compassion for herself, a little bit of still the anger and the bitterness, right? Like, it's all there. And she did it so well. Yeah. And
I think it's interesting too that she did give us this pairing of something normally thought of as like analytical and devoid of emotion, numbers, and then like apparently some really deep feeling about something. And so you're kind of weighing these two together until you get to the end where she's like, I tore the surface off of that because she was like, okay, no more artifice here. I'm feeling some things about this. I like that.
Yes, yes, so good. I love that. I love the way you express that. Yeah, tearing it off, no more fake. Yeah. Yeah, and that's so interesting too when she says, tomorrow you mentioned the 261 and the 4, and then here's something about 260 broke the spell inside me, offered up a tiny shit, and tore off 261. But then, like you said, what is this for, right? Like, it was something about 260 that made her tear off 261 as well as 4, And so it's, it's quite a brilliant piece. And again, too, I love the conciseness of her poem. She makes every word and number count. actually. Yeah. And we see the story that's in there too, right? I think that's another thing too that I love about poetry and spoken word. Spoken word is a little bit different because I think in poetry you can get away with kind of giving less information and withholding a lot. And that's actually the beauty of poetry is we don't want to give everything away because then there's no mystery, right? There's no sitting with the piece and there's no act of discovery, which I think is part of the joy of reading poetry is that not everything is given, if that makes sense. Not everything is like easily, and it was this, right? There's room for the interpretation, as in all art. With spoken word, I think we do need to do a little bit more work in giving enough information because it's such an instantaneous experience, right? Even though now we have like videos and people can rewatch it, it's not like they can sit with a written piece and go into it. There's an aspect of an instantaneous give and take. And so with spoken word, there is a measure of we have to give a little bit more information, right? So people can follow along. And so that's totally okay, but still giving just enough, right? And not giving too much where there's nothing left for the listener to discover or explore or even like make up, if that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Great, we have just two more. The last one is super short, but this is one of my favorite pieces is by Willie Perdomo. He's a poet from New York. And this is like from his book that he published long ago. And it's been used in so many different writing workshops. The Where I'm From poems are like famous. I don't know if he's the originator of the Where I'm From poem, but I feel like he is, but I'm not sure. But this is an excerpt from it. So would someone want to volunteer to read this?
I got you.
Okay, thank you.
Where I'm from, you run to the hospital emergency room because some little boy spit a razor out of his mouth and carved a crescent into your face. But you have to understand, where I'm from, even the dead have to wait until their number is called. Where I'm from, it's the late night scratch of rats' feet that explains what my mother means when she says slowly, "Bueno, mijo, eso es la vida del pobre." Well, son, that is the life of the poor. Where I'm from, it's sweet like my grandmother reciting a quick prayer over a pot of hot rice and beans. Where I'm from, it's pretty like my niece stopping me in the middle of the street and telling me to notice all the stars in the sky.
Any thoughts?
Wow, that last sentence just shifted the whole kind of the mood of the poetry.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really like how it focuses really on a lot of auditory cues. Having your number called, a quote from his mother, and prayer, and the child instructing him to look up. Like, these are all verbal things. I think that's interesting. Usually we're looking more towards visual cues, but
Yeah, and I love his writing too because he pays attention not just to the auditory cues in the content of what he's writing, but also in his word choice and what he's the words that he's choosing. There's such a rhythm to his writing, right? When he says, the late night scratch of rat's feet, right? There's a rhythm to that. And then it's contrasted with when she says, "Soy bueno, mijo. Eso es la vida del pobre," right? So you can hear the difference in the music of it. It's like the ba, 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 and then the more like do, 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 like the calmingness of that. And then, and exactly that turnaround in that last sentence, because here you have like these very, for him normal, and yet maybe for many others hard realities, right? And even just like this image of a little boy spit a razor out his mouth, carved a crescent into your face, right? Even just the rhythmic sound, like carved a crescent, is such a brilliant, is 3 brilliant words because of the sound. It sticks in your memory, and the imagery of it is like carved a crescent into your face, right? The word choice there is just brilliant because of the imagery, and as well as like it's almost like he's taking this very violent, you know, moment, and then juxtaposing it with the beauty of carving a crescent, right? It's just like you're in this state of, I don't know what to feel, right? Like, and then in the last, it's like, it's pretty, like my niece stopping me in the middle of the street, telling me to notice all the stars in the sky. It's just like that, it just sums it up, basically, right? Exactly, it just shifts this whole time. And if you read the whole full piece, that turnaround, it will hit you even greater, actually. Yeah. And this piece is, I would say, maybe more of a piece that can be shared, like as a spoken word piece, as a, you know, read aloud or performed piece, I would say, just the way that it's, and so that's something to also think about too. I think this is why in a lot of my spoken word, I rely so heavily on imagery as well as the sound and the rhythms, because it helps the reader also visualize, if that makes sense, as they're just listening, you know, because it's hard to follow unless you are very used to going to poetry readings and you read poetry and you are a poet and you're just like, you know, used to that. But then I think in other venues that I've been to, I try to just be mindful of who the listener in the audience will be, whether they are an audience that, you know, it's an open mic, and so they're, you know, much more keyed to the language of poetry and spoken word, or if it's a different kind of venue where there's, it's maybe better to use a piece that has a lot more of the sensory and the visual and the storytelling that people can more easily follow. And so even here, the repetition of where I'm from, you know, there's a musicality to that too. And so, yeah, definitely to encourage you guys to like draw from the fullness of, you know, the sounds and the images and the stories that you have, you know. Last one, and then we'll look very briefly at some delivery things. I want to spend more time on that part next week though, but then after this last poem that we look at, we'll look at some of the delivery things, and then we'll actually spend the rest of our time actually writing, just going through some type of very light kind of guided writing time together, so that you guys, just to start us off, and so we can have more, and then throughout the week we can work on those pieces a bit more. Last one is just really short. He's also one of my favorite poets, and so I just wanted to include him. Yeah. I can read this. Dear PTSD, I've always wondered what my dad was like before he met you.
That's powerful.
I know.
That just gets you real quick. Yeah.
He is kind of a, like a, I don't even know how to, like, he's a wordsmith with, like, he does a lot of Instagram poetry, which in most cases I would be very much like wary of, but he is so skillful in these short poems that just kind of punch you and hold such depth of meaning. And here too, there's an incredible story behind these 3 lines that we get a glimpse into, you know, and how he captured this wistfulness, this longing, this reality, and this kind of sadness, hopefulness, and yet there's no like, and we can imagine it was probably very difficult for him, you know, in his relationship with his father, and yet there's not this sense of like him condemning his dad, you know, like, and so it's just so, again, the intentionality of the words that he chose. And the innocence too in this poem. Yeah. And here too, he uses a bit of personification. He personifies PTSD, you know, as a person, and
And I love how the poems don't have to be long to be impactful.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. It's around what is it that you want to share, right? And then looking at what is the best way to say what you really want to say, I guess. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So hopefully this has been, I mean, I know it's only 4 poems, but I definitely wanted to give kind of a diversity of examples, because that's something too that I want to encourage, you know, as each person is very unique. And so having a diversity of poems, I think, to look at can really encourage us too, that there's no, this is the only way to write a spoken word piece or the only way to write a poem. It's not necessarily that. It's like in each of these poems, they are able to skillfully use poetic language and poetic devices in a way that's unique to them to share their story. And so that's really the goal, is not to make cookie cutter poetry, but to learn how to use, you know, tried and tested linguistic poetic devices that have been around just since the beginning of language, right? And that have come from communication, the way humans communicate. So to use those devices to bring out the uniqueness of each of our stories and voices. So just very quickly with delivery and performance, and then we'll do more, we'll work more on this next week and go through some exercises with our pieces. But just for now, because part of writing a spoken word piece is to also pay attention to how am I going to deliver this? How am I going to share this? Because that will also actually affect the writing of the piece too, is your voice, right? The actual sound of the piece when you release it. So just some very practical elements to that is pacing, the pacing of your piece, right? Maybe, for example, Willie Perdomo's piece, you know, I'm not sure the way he delivers it, but even the pacing of where I'm from, it's the late night scratch of rat's feet that explains what my mother means when she says slowly, bueno, mijo, eso es la vida del pobre. So the pacing of that too, right? The late night scratch of rat's feet is a little bit faster, right? And then you kind of like can slow down on bueno, mijo, eso es la vida del pobre. And so that's one example of just pacing. Emphasis, the way that we emphasize or de-emphasize certain words or certain sentences or phrases, there's different ways to do that, whether it's with a pause, like a silence, or whether you get louder at certain points or you draw back. Again, it goes, you know, you can emphasize with pacing as well. You can emphasize with a gesture, right? But in terms of just our voices, those are some things you can emphasize, different ways you can emphasize, or even a different way you pronounce a word or mispronounce a word intentionally can bring emphasis to that portion or to that word. Register, that speaks of like where you're speaking from, whether you're speaking from like your chest or your nose or down from your belly. And so research has shown that people who tend to speak more like down from their chest here versus up here in their nose, that people tend to think that if you speak more from like your chest or like below, you have more authority. So, so you know, which register are you using when you're saying certain lines can also, even on a subconscious level, affect the understanding of the poem to the listener. Volume, how loud you get, how soft you get, and pitch. Pitch is more about like how high your voice goes or how low your voice goes, right? So it's a little different from register. Register is more about like, where are you speaking from? Whereas pitch is like your pitch. And that often expresses tone, right? So when people are angry, their pitch tends to go high, right? Like, what are you doing? Right? And their volume tends to go high. You can even say that in a whisper, what are you doing? Right? Versus like, what are you doing? Right? It's like, you're confused. And so with pitch also, these are just the actual mechanical elements of creating meaning with your voice and sound. And so in a piece, just paying attention to those dynamics, right? And making sure you have the right dynamics for your content and for your piece, because the delivery and performance of a spoken word piece, it just they're interrelated layers of meaning, right? The writing and then how you're delivering it. And so paying attention to those things, and we'll do some exercises to kind of explore and exercise those actual mechanical toolboxes for our voice and for the sound of our piece. And then there's a physical expression. I guess it's a little bit more limited now since things have gone more online, but in person, always just your body posture is very simple. I think when I first started out, and this is still an area I have to really grow in, but when I first started out, like I didn't really pay attention to my body posture or gestures because my whole energy was just like, I have to just remember this piece, right? I just want to remember the piece, not go through it too quickly, and just like make sure I deliver it right, you know? So I didn't really pay attention to my body posture, my physical expression, or my facial expressions. Honestly, most of my pieces I would deliver with my eyes like closed very tightly, you know, because I was like deathly afraid. I had like really bad stage fright. But your body posture, like if you're standing up straight versus like, are you slouched over? And you know, that could be part of your piece too, right? So thinking about your body posture, or just a very neutral body posture, is also most pieces can have just a neutral body posture. But even that, because that will impart meaning. Like if you're, you know, leaning on one foot with your hip out, has a very different connotation than if you're just standing straight, you know, and looking straight forward at the audience. You know, if you got your arms crossed like this and you're delivering a piece, right? That is all part of the performance of the piece as well. So intentional gestures as well. Those are a great way to put emphasis on certain words, or even sometimes create clarification of a certain piece, or even bring a pun or a joke. And exactly, unintentional gestures can be very distracting. And so that's something I struggle with. My hands, they always move around. So even when I'm doing spoken words, I'm like, a lot of times my hand will just like move, and it's like, there's no intention to it. It's just my own tick. And so it can be very distracting, actually. So being aware of our physical movements as well. And then facial expressions too. That includes, you know, eyes, brows, mouth, chin, nose in general. You know, eye contact, being intentional with eye contact. If your piece is, you know, it also depends upon your piece too. If there is, you know, one of my friends, one of the pieces that she has is about how as a girl, she had to live through sexual assault. And so when she says this piece, you know, she she says like she has to actually go back to that place, in that emotional place, and it's very taxing for her to do this piece, right? But for her, she shares like, yeah, and I'm intentional with how my body is postured. Like when I go into the piece, I'm not looking up, I'm not looking up, I'm looking down. I'm like very much, in my physical expression, my mouth, I've got like a flat face, and I have to go in, into that place. And so those different things to take account of. And I think too, when we are writing a piece that is, and we've sat with a piece, and it is a personal piece, and we are understanding the emotional demand of that piece, and we've sat with it. A lot of the physical expressions will come actually very naturally, is what I've discovered, because you've already sat with that piece and through the emotions of that piece and of your story. And so oftentimes through that process, you naturally know, like your body will naturally actually express the emotions of that piece too, if that makes sense. But it's also something to also just be aware of and keep in mind when we are looking at strictly the delivering performance aspect of it, to look at like, oh, what are some physical cues that I can give to the listener to help them understand this piece and the emotions in it as well. So that's something we will work on more next week. So I do want to give some time for us to write together. If we feel okay with doing that, but are there any questions first, or thoughts or feedback or additions to anything that has been shared so far? Okay, great.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask
Yes.
actually, do you highly recommend to probably watch the YouTube videos first that you have mentioned earlier?
I do recommend it. Yes, the first workshop, I go a lot more into detail with the devices and with the performance and with those things that I mentioned. There's a lot more detail and explanation in those first two videos. So it's a good refresher. It's a good review. So I do recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, because my intention was I wanted to get more into spoken word, but I didn't really know how to get into it. So I probably should have done that first. But yeah, this was good. This was really good to hear feedback from the the poems that you have shared, and then also the different devices that you showed. And that was really good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the first workshop we did, we definitely go more into detail. So I think in the registration email there was a link for that, correct? Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure you can find it easily. Yeah. Great. So let's have a time to write together. And Jel, you can we'll recorded this and we'll send a link to it, so you can just do it throughout the week. Totally up to you. Don't feel pressure.
Sounds good. Thank you. I was
Yeah.
trying to scribble on the on a piece of paper earlier, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or you can like go into your notes, Yeah. So we'll do a time to write together. It's just like a short, maybe process of kind of what I do. But yeah, if we're ready, we'll just go straight into it. So if everyone has pen, paper, or if you like to type, yeah, however you feel like it. So one of the things too is when we, just in general, when I think about communication and the, I guess what I like to call them like linguistic ecosystems that we're living in. One skill that I realize that we really need for healthy linguistic ecosystems is listening, right? And listening beyond just actual words, but listening to the speaker's like heart and in between the lines. And observing and listening with compassion, really, and with honesty, and how to do that for ourselves too, right? Like how to listen to ourselves, right? To our inner self, to our heart, with compassion, with honesty, listening for like, what are the things that are coming to the surface that you know, either we have not fully dealt with and that want to be dealt with, or listening to the questions that are coming up, or listening to the hard emotions that are coming up. Because anytime we have our emotions that are harassing us, right? That are disrupting our sense of safety and peace and well-being. When we have that, it's a cue that something is unresolved, right? And a lot of times we'll go straight into condemning ourselves, right? Like, oh my gosh, like, why do I hate that person? I'm such a bad person for hating that person, right? When it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Like, yes, hatred is a destructive emotion, but there must be a reason why I have this emotion inside me. And so listening to ourselves, listening to our bodies, listening to our thoughts, not with like an automatic judging conclusion, but with that compassion, that honesty of like, okay, why is that there, right? And it's a process of self-reflection as well, but I just say listening, and it's a practice we may often actually do for our friends all the time, right? We listen, right? We don't judge them, we're listening, we're there for them. And so right now I want to do that, but do that for ourselves. Right? Listening to you know, our heart, for lack of a better word, and listening to our thoughts, listening to our emotions, and kind of just jotting down. And as we're doing this, the questions that I want to ask is, which memories come to the surface? So if we just like sit, get comfortable, maybe not too comfortable or we'll fall asleep, but and then just, you can close your eyes if that helps. And just kind of breathe, like take a moment, right? And just get to a place where you're just intentionally listening to your thoughts, to what's coming from your emotions, from your heart. Listening to your soul, to your spirit. And then as different memories or images or pictures or even sound bites from your life come up, you can start jotting those down. And you don't have to censor yourself, because that space of the paper is safe. It's just for you. And we're not making any judgment calls on the images or the memories or the sound bites that are coming up. We're just right now recording them. And as you're jotting things down, maybe you find that there's a few or one memory or a few moments that are stronger than the others. Or maybe your attention is drawn to a certain one. You can jot down colors, sounds, any textures. What are the sensory details in those moments or that memory? What are some of the emotions that are connected with either that moment or that memory or those pictures or those sound bites? The emotions you felt at the time of the moment, or even the emotions that you're feeling right now, or even the progression of, of emotions from that moment until now. Overarching emotions, undercurrent emotions, all, 261 emotions. give about maybe five more minutes, and then we can kind of share together whatever we feel comfortable sharing. And then, yeah, maybe about 5 more minutes of the, and then if you feel like, oh, I'm stuck, I have it all written down, I would encourage you just to press a little bit more, a little bit deeper. Like if you're done kind of just recording, like listening and recording, and there is something that stands out, like pressing into that more, and maybe now begin to try and make some like response to that memory, response to that moment. I think this is where we practice a lot of honesty and compassion for ourselves and taking responsibility, um, but also having compassion. It's just a couple more minutes. Okay, so maybe do we want to share? You can either share what you wrote or kind of what that was like. I know it's like very short, and encourage you can do this over the week too and kind of press in more and take some time. But just in the short time that we were able to today, yeah, I would love to hear what that was like. What was it, a little bit challenging, or was it like, oh my gosh, all all of this came out, I couldn't stop? Or yeah, just let's feel free to share however much or however little you want. But yeah, would love to just give an opportunity, yeah, to hear.
Well, I had a pretty good jumble of things down, but one of the last things I wrote and rested on was this concept that I'm an ancestor and also a child. Like, I am the person that I wanted to be 10 years back, and then I am also that child to whoever I'm going to be 10 years from now, and sort of like holding that within myself in this moment and like recognizing that I am both learning and teaching myself. I'm kind of playing with that concept.
That is very profound. You are both child and ancestor. I don't think I've like, I know this concept, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone like put that together or kind of like sit with that and want to like work through that. That is a lot. Wow.
Yeah, well, now I have to do something with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's where I ended up tonight.
Wow. What were some of like, were there any like images or emotions that kind of like came with that as you were sitting with that?
Yeah, well, I started out just like you were saying, like do a snapshot of where you're at mentally right now. And I've been dealing with a lot of grief stuff and just having the worst time trying to process that. And I think that's how I came along to that, you know, there are things that I don't know, that I don't have all the answers for. And so in that way, I'm a child. But then there are some deep wisdom and stuff that I can draw on for this. And so I kind of just need to like mother myself sort of thing, but then also have that grace to say like, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be healed. You can be in this state of flux because you always are. You always are knowing and not knowing all at once. So I think that's probably how I ended up where I did.
I like how you said that, like you're in a state of flux, knowing and not knowing. I think that's probably a very compassionate and honest assessment, right, of every person and ourselves. And I think sometimes we can easily forget that. So I'm excited to see how you'll work that out. And yeah, definitely hope like there will be a lot of maybe like even comparison. I think there can be like a lot of beautiful even analogies or comparisons that can come out of that. Even how you're saying sometimes I have to mother myself through this process, and I feel like there that, and then like the things that you've mentioned, I feel like there's like a wealth of, you know, imagery and analogies that can really be drawn from that too. So I'm very looking forward to seeing
And
what
I'm
comes.
really
Yeah.
gonna try and see like for the delivery itself, like one of the poems you shared really had that like wave flow to it where it was like fast and slow, fast and slow, fast and slow, and trying to so mirror my concept in that way, like the delivery. I'm not very good at that, so I'm gonna work on that.
Is there also like a specific memory where this concept kind of like was birthed from, or like a specific
No,
moment that
I
you
didn't
were like,
really
oh,
draw Yeah,
Okay.
no, I didn't really. I had like several things that
Hmm.
sort of been on my heart. And so I think it was the combination of them all together made me feel like the anxiety that I'm feeling around all of them. And then I
Mm.
said, like, then that's when myself came in, saying, calm down. You don't have to have a direct answer for this, and you're never going to reach a state where you're
Mm.
just settled on things, so just accept that. And so then within me there was that kind of push and pull, ebb
Mm.
and flow. So I think I'm trying to capture the emotions of several uh,
Wow.
experiences at once, so that's the
Wow.
struggle.
I think that's great too, because what you just described, I feel like is kind of like a mini cosmos of the writing process, right? Of like what a writer goes through actually.
For sure.
So even though I mean, maybe that's like a little harder to write because there's less of like these physical narrative actions, that a listener can hear. But I feel like even just what you described there, if you like kind of even explore that even a little further, maybe there is something. I feel like there's something,
Yeah.
yeah, that could be there too. That will be really powerful. Yeah, yeah. Jel, were you able to? Um, were there any thoughts, even if um, there was no writing, physical jotting down? But if there was any thoughts that came up that you wanted to share?
Um, no, I was just I was pretty distracted with grocery
It's
shopping. I'm
all
sorry.
good. No worries.
But I was listening to what Lindsay was saying about
Mhm.
how like being in that middle ground of like, oh, basically it's like we're not going to be any younger or any older than how how we
Mm.
are right now. I mean, yes, we are going to be, it's the oldest that we know right
Mhm.
now, and then later on it'll, like, that's just so crazy to me. I'm like, you put me in that position now too, Lindsay, and I'm kind of like, wow, that's a good place. Like, that's a good start. I don't know what to do with that either, but yeah, that was really good.
Yeah.
Thank
I like how you put that too. Like we're the youngest and oldest we've ever been or something. Yeah. Yeah. That is a lot to
you.
sit
Right.
with. Yeah. Yeah. Jenny or Sarah, how is it for you?
I have to be honest. I'm not I have fear of really when it comes to writing. But I was really encouraged by the last example of poetry that you shared. How short it was. So it gave me a comfort to just start writing and just
Mm.
kind of dump things. And I
Mm.
mean, it doesn't like seem to make all that sense, but I was having fun. I'll actually read what I just wrote.
Yes, please.
It's incomplete, but yeah, this is a safe place, so I'll
Yes, it
read
is.
it. So it says My Cloud. The title is My Cloud. White and fluffy rebel with mind of its own, conquering territories with marking of its own. That's pretty much all that I wrote right now, but but yeah, I wanna I think somehow close it, informing the reader that the cloud is my dog, but I just don't know how to do that yet. But yeah, he just brings a lot of joy and a lot of emotions to me. So I wanted to do something, write something about my dog. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's gonna be such a good piece. I
Why
love the
is
way you,
that?
no, I love it. Like conquering
Territories.
territories of its own. Yes, I love that.
Yeah,
Especially
and I'm
because,
seeing. Uh-huh.
go
Oh
ahead.
no, go. Yeah, so I was kind of writing it, and it's I started with with mine of its own, but then the second sentence or whatever the section, it says that with marking of its own. So
Mm.
maybe I don't know if this is some like somewhat of a repetition, if that's something that can be useful to communicate. But
yeah,
that's
I would say
it.
go for it. I love it.
Just to write these like 4 lines, I was like, so I
love that.
realized more I was kind of trying to write, I had a deeper appreciation for the other poems that or poets that we read earlier. I was like, they're genius. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love to like definitely, writing around and things that like mean something for us, that bring us joy or love or like a question that we have. It's so interesting that you wrote on Cloud, your dog. It's just really cute too because her dog is like small, so like the small conquering territory. It's like very cute. It's actually but it's like his. it's so cute, but it's so true. Yeah, and I was actually thinking of my dog too, and when I was writing down, and my dog actually passed away 3 years ago, and it was just a very hard parting because so that was kind of the memory that was coming up. So I was just writing different things like that. So just about saying goodbye to Scout. And so dogs are family. So but wonderful. So I want to encourage us to maybe spend time with either this piece or if there's like another piece that does come, like I don't want to limit ourselves. And next week, I would request that we come with like a piece that's, a minute long is I think a good minimum. Maybe 1 minute to 3 minutes max. If it's shorter, that's okay because that's totally okay. But maybe no more than like 3 minutes, I think would be good. So between 1-3. Yes, Jel.
Yeah, I do have a piece that I'm kind of trying to work on. I don't know if that would be cool to share here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's not done yet whatsoever, but I'm gonna stop my video because it's on the other app.
Yes,
so,
yes.
yeah, thanks. All right, cool. All right, here we go. Let me walk you through the process in my mind. As thoughts come up, words take a little to find. As I was pondering, sitting and just soaking in his presence, all the weight, anxiety, and worry lay defenseless. See, Holy Spirit has a way to simplify the difficult. Funny at times, in order, he doesn't do things, makes you just halt. He likes to keep us on our toes, to have us stay close. So you better hear his voice, because what he says goes. And just how do we hear his voice, you ask? Well, even if you didn't, it's the task that keep us healthy, wealthy, and sane in all our life's areas, whether in joy or in pain. Lay up treasures in heaven, the Bible says, because this world is perishing more, not less. Jesus, his name and his word are one. All the other gods will leave you gone and undone. His is the only name by which we can be saved. No other sacrifice is precious. His blood saves. Overcame and conquered this blood of the Lamb. It does, done, doing. The word of their testimony, not loving their lives to death nor dying. That was it.
Thank you so much. What was the first line again?
The first line, I said, let me walk you through the process in my mind. As thoughts come up, words take a little to find.
I love it. Yeah. I think just from the first hearing, I mean, I would like to probably like see and hear it a little bit more, but I would definitely encourage you to like see which like the literary devices you can incorporate to bring out even more what your like what is the content, the message that you want to bring to people. yeah, because I think that will bring more vibrancy and life and animation to what you're saying and to the message that you're sharing. And even I think there were some like this world is perishing or some like those things too. Even how you can put even like mm, like details that are I guess give the listener a little bit of a more glimpse into how you are seeing those things. Does that make sense? Like how you respond to these statements. And so giving that layer as well, I think can connect back even more strongly to let me share with you the process and the thoughts that come to my mind. Because I think if you just add that layer also, it can create because it is definitely an invitation into, you know, the thoughts that are in your mind, the message that is in your mind, the what's in your heart. And so I think it's okay to incorporate, to keep going with, like, not lose that layer in your piece, if that makes sense. Just so it moves beyond like I don't know how to put it, like I think putting it like how these truths have affected you personally too, like incorporating that in there, I think will bring a level of intimacy to the piece that I think can be very powerful. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to see more of, yeah, right, like a testimony, like my
Exactly.
personal
Exactly.
take on it. Because yeah, I
Exactly.
know I was trying to be surface level. So it is when you introduced the you know, when you were starting off, when you were sharing, like you need to take courage to
Yeah.
be vulnerable, and it's a scary place. So
Yeah.
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 All right, thank you
Yeah.
for your feedback. I need to work on it, I know.
No, it's such a good start. And I agree with Lindsay. I love the rhythm of it as well. And so, yeah, putting, you know, a little, that I think will make it even more powerful. Yeah. Yeah. It is scary though, but I think you can do it. Yeah. Thank you for
Got
sharing.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
beautiful.
you for
Thank you.
listening.
Yeah. Okay, so then for this week, if we can work on these pieces a bit more, getting like maybe, I mean, it doesn't have to be like a final draft, but as close to something that you're like, I think this is, you know, a good place. And then we can work on those, and then we'll do more exercises on the delivery and just practicing those things too. Yeah. Great. So thank you all so much. This was so much fun. Definitely, yes. Looking forward, yes, to next week as well, and all of the pieces that we will hear and share. Thank you so much for today. Have a great, great night. Thank you. Have a good sleep, good rest. Yes. Okay. We'll see you next week. Bless you
See you
guys.
next week. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.